What's up, guys? Today we're in the shop again and we're working on this 2002 Buick Lesabre, and I'm going to walk you guys through doing valve cover gaskets and a lower intake gasket on the non-supercharged 3800. So the first thing you're going to do here is you're going to drain the radiator completely, because when we pull this intake off, there's going to be coolant in there and we don't want it to go everywhere. And you're not, though, going to drain the oil yet, and I'm going to show you why you're not going to do it yet a little bit further along. Then the next thing we need to do is we're going to pull this air box, or at least the intake tube and the front of the air box, out of the way, and pull this upper radiator hose off out of the way to get a little room. That's pretty easy. That's just a clamp right here. That's just going to come off without doing anything, and then you're just going to unfasten this box and pull this stuff up. The next thing I usually do is number the spark plug wires, because just being able to take them off and get them out of the way speeds things up a lot. Now, you're welcome to go through in here and number these to what cylinder that they go to. However, these, A, don't have those numbers on the coil anyway, and B, I don't really care about that right now. As long as they go back where they came off, that's what matters, and we're not changing these wires this time. So I just numbered them in order. That way when I'm done, I know if I'm in order, I'm good. Once those are off and out of the way, I'm gonna take this little guide off, transfer that to my pile of parts to clean before I put them back. I also should mention I already took the appearance cover off, but I did that before I started filming. So with that out of the way, the first thing you're gonna do while your coolant is draining or whatever is coming here to the back seat. This back seat just pops up and you pull it out. There is the battery for the Lesabre, and you're just going to disconnect this negative and make sure that it cannot touch the battery so you don't have any live voltage while you're working on the next part. The next thing I did was take the serpentine belt off. That's really easy on one of these. You really just need a long 15 to take the tension off and just pull the belt right out of the way. Then we're gonna pull this alternator off. To do that, all I need to do is disconnect this one here. There's one electrical plug here. Then you have one bolt down here, this one up here, which you're gonna need to take this nut off and then take this side off over here, and this whole rod comes out. Then you're gonna take the bolt out of there, and then there's one short bolt back behind this. So you're gonna take all that off and the alternator will be out of the way. The next thing I did after removing the alternator, and I stuck the alternator over here with the bolt still with it, that way I can keep all that together. I went ahead and took both the heater hoses off. Then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to unbolt this bracket with the tensioner attached to it and pull that off to get it off the top of the back valve cover. If I wasn't doing the back valve cover, I might consider not taking this off, but since I am, I have to do that. And if you're going to do that, make sure you pick up a set of these. Here's the part number from any part store before you start, because these plastic elbows here and here will absolutely break no matter what you do, and the aluminum ones are much better. Here's the tensioner removed. Here are the 3 bolts that hold it on. This is the one that usually gets people, because if you're standing like this, which is how you're looking at it from the top, it's kind of hard to see that one. Other than that, here's a quick shot of these elbows, both of which broke, before I even pulled them off. So you are gonna need to make sure that you get in here and in here, wherever it is, in here, to clean out what's left of those elbows before you put it back. But with that out of the way, the rear valve cover is almost uncovered. So we are going to move on to the next part, which is going to be over here. What I'm gonna do is pull this throttle body off, hang it over here. But when you do that, make sure you cover this end so you don't dent that up. Then with that out of the way, we'll start working on the fuel rail. Okay, actually, once the throttle body is off, this is the best time to pull this Egr tube out. I would definitely put some PB Blaster on this first. These tend to be rusty, but there's only one nut here and one bolt here. Then these little collars will slide back and you can very carefully pull them out like that. This is very thin metal though, by the way, and try not to bend it or mess with it any more than you have to, or you will end up cracking it and you will wind up with a vacuum leak. Okay, the next thing to do, you're gonna take the purge valve here off, and you can just push this tab, which is kind of hard to get to, and it'll slide up. Unplug this electrical connector, take this off of here. Then, with this whole thing free, you're just gonna take these two fuel lines off, and both fuel lines disconnect the same way. You just push these two plastic tabs together and pop the line up. When all three of them are loose and you loose this from the bracket, I would suggest taking it, all three together, and just taking a bungee cord and tying it up out of the way. Then from here, you're basically going to unplug everything that connects to this. All of these connectors, you want to undo where it connects here. You want this to be completely loose so you've got some room to work around it like this. Then the next move is there are going to be 4 of these nuts that hold this fuel rail down. And we're going to take all 4 of those off next, and then this whole rail is going to pop up, which you'll have to probably get under each injector a little bit and push it up because it's not going to want to come out. But then once all 6 of them are loose from the lower manifold, we'll pull this whole rail off. Okay, now hold on. I've got these loose, but before you pop these injectors up, you're about to start opening up the top of the motor. Now is the perfect time to think about how clean this area is, because when you start taking this stuff apart, these little pieces of leaf and everything are going to try to find their way into the inside of the engine. So I would suggest either blowing this out, or if you've got a small vacuum with a good attachment, you can use that too, and just get this cleaned up before you start pulling the rest of this. Next, we're gonna remove this Egr Shield, which is just a couple tins. There's one here and one over there. Then you are going to disconnect the booster hose from the back, and you are going to pull all of these 8mm bolts all the way around so we can pull this intake manifold off. Okay, then there are also a couple of 10mm studs. There's one right here, and then there's one over in this corner. Once all those are out, you should be able to just grab this manifold and pull it right loose. Just like that. And we'll just set that out of the way for right now. And we get our first look at the lower intake manifold, complete with some gaskets that stayed on here. With that out of the way, we have 2 brackets we need to remove. This little bracket right here, and then these 2 bolts right here that hold this metal bracket. So now at this point, we just have a crap ton of these little, what are actually probably 3/8, but also 10mm bolts that you're going to need to pull. And you will need to remember that there are 2 secret bolts. They're always under oil, so you can't ever see them. You need to clean the oil out of this corner and this corner to see the 2 bolts that are in there. Otherwise, you will fight with this thing forever and never get it off. Here's a shot of one of them with the oil out. Basically, the other corner is exactly the same way. Confirmed, those are 3/8 bolts. I would not recommend using 10s on those, as you will probably strip them out. Once all of those are out though, you should be able to just grab one end, pull up on it, but do make sure that you have all the bolts out first, because if you're wrong and you try to force it, you can break it. And then there's actually a spot right here you can get a pry bar that you can pry it pretty easily. Once you've got it loose, there you go, it will come right off. And as you can see, you will still lose a little bit of coolant because it seems like these things never drain all the way, no matter what you do. But once you have that out of the way, we'll set the intake manifold over here to be cleaned. And you get your first look at the inside of the engine, and holy crap, what is that? That looks like someone has been using possibly some stop leak or something. So I'm gonna have to open the head ports up because this one is almost stopped up the same way. But the inside, as far as the oil part, actually is pretty clean, which I'm happy about. So I think this is gonna do pretty well. So the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get this cleaned up. Now this is why I said not to change the oil or not to drain the oil earlier. What I'm gonna do is clean this. Whatever gets cleaned and washed down into the valley is gonna go into the oil pan. Then we're going to change the oil before the engine gets started again. That way any trash that does accidentally get washed down is gonna wind up getting flushed out the bottom rather than getting sucked back up and run through the engine. Now, you can also lay rags down here, which will help, but some will almost always still get by. So that's why I always wait to change the oil to the last right before we're ready to put it back together. If you're this far, the valve covers are pretty wide open except for the back, which we'll get to in a minute, but the front, you just pop the bolts right off and you can pull that right out. There, looks pretty good. Then we're just take the valve cover, add it to the list of things to clean. Then for the rear, basically the only thing that's really gonna be in my way a little is this rear bracket. So you're gonna have to take the bolts that hold this down off, which are down behind there. With that out of the way, you should be able to get in here and take all these loose and just pull it up and out this way. And touch down. That is the end of the disassembly. Now that bracket in the middle, all I really did there was I backed both nuts off to pretty much the end of the stud, and that allowed it to lay back far enough I could just pull the valve cover out. So the next step is a whole lot of cleanup. Okay, so the valve covers are cleaned up and reinstalled. I will put their Torx back here, and the intake is well underway and being cleaned and ready to go back. So next we're going to set up the gaskets. So with the lower intake gaskets on these, there are two versions that you can get. Normally I would only recommend the metal ones as they are a big upgrade over stock. However, I am doing this job for someone else and I didn't get to pick parts. So we are stuck with these factory style ones. These do not last as long. I don't recommend them, but it's what I have, so it's what I'm gonna have to do. I'll link down in the description, as well as probably put a picture here of what the ones that I would suggest you use are, so that you'll know what to get. So first of all, this is another reason that bungee cords are great, because you can tie stuff up and just have a clear shot to put that intake straight in, which is awesome. Secondly, this is how the gaskets go in. These sit in little holes here and they butt up against the sides. They sit in little alignment dowels here. Then it comes with a small tube of black silicone, which you're supposed to use in the corners here. We're gonna throw that right out, and we're gonna use ultra gray instead because it's a lot stronger and I like it better. Okay, so this next part's kind of complicated to spell out in a video, so I'm just gonna show you guys the procedure. When you're putting the lower intake manifold back, you are going to apply thread locker to the bolts. You're going to tighten the bolts in this order, and this way you guys can just pause the video if you want to see what that is. And then you're going to tighten the lower intake bolts in sequence to 11 foot-pounds. Once you've got the lower done, the upper is the next part, which is not too bad. This bottom gasket is basically a plate that snaps on and off. Everything else is pretty much all O-rings. Make sure these are in good shape or replace them. Then you're just gonna stick them back on here and get them torqued down. Don't forget, and I would probably suggest doing this before you put the intake on, don't forget this bracket in the front and don't forget that bracket in the back. It's actually easier to put back without the intake on. And then the next thing I'm gonna do is put this EGR tube back. Then you're just gonna put the EGR bracket back. Same two bolts, no big deal there. Then we're gonna put the rail back in and tighten the 4 nuts that hold it in. One trick with this rail is if you lubricate the lower O-ring with a little bit of like silicone grease or something, it will go in much easier. Otherwise, they will seriously probably fight you. Oh, make sure that you tighten this. Sorry, I forgot to mention that earlier. I also put this vacuum line back. Next thing I'm gonna do is drop these lines down, which I just have them tied up here. And with them dropped back in, just snap them back into place here. Snap these back in. Make sure that the plastic piece at the bottom is turned the right way. And if it is, then they should just plop right down. They don't normally fight much. And then you're gonna take your purge valve and plug it back in. Snap it back onto this bracket that it sits on, like so. Then you're just gonna need to take, I'm putting this line back. This piece actually broke, so I've got just a piece of hose in here for right now until I can get a hold of the correct elbow, but that's probably gonna have to be ordered. But then anyway, you can connect the rest of the electrical connectors here and along the front of there. Then we're gonna put this back. And the next thing you're gonna do is you're gonna fight with this bracket for what will feel like a year to get what's left of the old elbows out. Be patient with this part. It's gonna probably not come out in one piece and it's gonna be very difficult. Once you've got those out though, lubricate the O-rings on the new elbows and go ahead and pre-install them in the correct positions on this bracket. Then we'll just line them up, slip them in there and start the bolts. Once you've got the bracket back in with your fancy new elbows and everything is sealed up good, you put the hoses back on, then move your stuff out of the way so you're ready to put the alternator back. Then once the alternator is bolted back down, you can run your wires back to the back. Then it's gonna be time to go ahead and put this belt back on. And in case anyone gets to this point and can't remember the routing, here's a quick rundown of where the belt goes. Next, I put the throttle body back. Notice the screen is not damaged. That's what you want it to look like. And I put this support brace back here. So most of the outside is together. I'm about to put this upper radiator hose back. Then we're gonna put that back and make sure you plug in the temp sensor. Then it's gonna be oil and filter time and we can see if this thing runs. So after double checking and topping off the oil and the coolant, although I'm still letting it burp a little bit there and bleeding it there, she starts up and runs like a champ. Everything is looking pretty good. I'm gonna let it run for a few minutes and warm up, make sure everything is working correctly, and then this one should be finished for tonight. Well, that's about it for this one. I'm not done with this car forever, but I'm definitely done for it tonight. And if you like this video or if it was helpful to you, don't forget to hit the like button down below and comment and let me know what you thought, as well as make sure that you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any future videos and that you've hit the bell icon so that YouTube will notify you, even though they still might not. But anyway, thank you for watching and I will see you guys all in the next video. Thank you so much for watching and peace.